Generative AI is an incredible technology, but it has its limits. We will take a close look at what large language models or LLMs can and cannot do. First, I'll share a useful way to think about what LLMs are capable of, and then we'll explore some specific limitations. Understanding these limitations can help us avoid using them for tasks they aren't suited for. If you're wondering what an LLM can handle through prompting, we can have a simple mental framework that can be helpful. You can just ask yourself, could a fresh college graduate complete this task by just following the instructions? For example, could a fresh grad read an email and decide if it's a complaint? I think they could, and an LLM could do that well too. Or could they read a restaurant review and figure out if it's positive or negative? Again, they likely could, and so can an LLM when prompted correctly. Another example, could a fresh college grad write a press release without knowing anything about your COO or your company? Probably not. They've just graduated, they don't know you, and they don't have much context. So, the best they could do is write a generic and likely unsatisfactory press release. On the flip side, if you give the fresh college grad more context about your business and the COO, then you can ask, can they write a press release with that information? I think they could probably do a decent job. And similarly, so can a large language model. So when you're thinking about what an LLM can do, picture it as similar to what a fresh college graduate might handle. This graduate has lot of general knowledge, mostly from the internet, but they don't have access to a web search engine and they don't know anything specific about you or your business. In this analogy, or we call thought experiment, the fresh college grad has to complete tasks without any specialized training about your company. Likewise, every time you prompt an LLM, it doesn't remember previous conversations. It's like working with a new graduate every time. So you don't get the chance to train them over time or teach them your company's specifics or preferred writing style. So there is this rule of thumb, asking what a fresh college grad can do is not really perfect. There are tasks a college grad can do that LLMs can't, and vice versa. This concept can be helpful as a starting point for understanding the capabilities and limitations of LLMs. While this approach helps when considering what you can do with prompting alone, in future discussions on generative AI projects, we will explore more advanced techniques that can expand what LLMs are capable of beyond this fresh college grad analogy. Now let's take a closer look at some specific limitations of LLMs. The first one is knowledge cutoffs. An LLM's knowledge is limited to the time it was trained. For example, if the model was trained using data up to until, let's say, January 2022, it wouldn't know anything that happened after that. So, if you were to ask such a model, what was the highest grossing film of 2022, it wouldn't be able to answer, even though we now know that Avatar, let's say Avatar, The Way of Water was the highest grossing film during that year. The LLM would be unaware of this because it was trained before this information became available. Another example, around July 2023, there were claims from a research lab about the discovery of a room temperature superconductor called LK-99. You may have seen this in the news, but that claim later turned out to be incorrect. However, if you ask an LLM about LK-99, even though it was widely covered in 2023, the LLM wouldn't know anything about it if its training data only goes up to January 2022. This is an example of a knowledge cutoff where the LLM only knows information available up to a certain point in time based on when its training data was last updated. A second limitation of LLMs is that they sometimes make things up. This is a phenomenon known as hallucinations or hallucination. For instance, if I ask an LLM to provide quotes from well known historical figures, it may invent quotes. Take, for example, if you ask for three quotes that Shakespeare wrote about Beyonce, the LLM might respond with something like, her vocals shine like the sun, or all hail the queen, she is most worthy of love. Since Shakespeare lived and died long before Beyonce, he couldn't have said anything about her. So these quotes are examples of hallucinated Shakespearean quotes, demonstrating that LLMs can confidently create false information. For example, an LLM is asked to list court cases related to AI tried in California. It might give answers that sound authoritative. In this case, the first case it mentions, Waymo versus Uber, is real. However, there is no available record of a case called Ingersoll versus Chevron, which means that the second case is a hallucination. LLMs can sometimes present made up information in a very confident tone, which can mislead people into thinking that these fabricated details are real. These hallucinations can have serious consequences. For instance, there was this lawyer who used ChatGPT to generate text for a legal case and submitted it to the court without realizing that it contained many fabricated court cases. In a New York Times article, it was reported that during a cringe inducing court hearing, the lawyer stated that he did not understand how the chatbot could lead him astray. As a result, this lawyer faced sanctions for submitting a filing that included made up information. Therefore, it's really crucial to understand the limitations of LLMs, especially when using them for documents that carry significant consequences. LLMs also have a technical limitation regarding the length of input and output. Specifically, there is a limit to how long the prompt can be, as well as how much text the model can generate in response. Most LLMs can only accept prompts that are a few thousand words long, which means the amount of context you can provide is limited. For example, if you ask the LLM to summarize a research paper that is much longer than its input limit, it may not be able to process the request. In such cases, the LLM could refuse to accept the input altogether. So, in this situation, you might need to provide the LLM with one section of the paper at a time and ask it to summarize each part individually. Some LLMs can handle longer input lengths, with some capable of processing tens of thousands of words. However, LLMs have a limitation known as context length, which refers to the total size of the input plus the output. When I use LLMs, I usually don't generate so much output that I hit the output length limit. However, I often encounter input length limits, which I have thousands of words of context to provide. Lastly, a significant limitation of generative AI is that it doesn't work well with structured data. By structured data, we mean tabular data, like what you might store in an Excel or Google Sheets spreadsheet. For example, consider a table of home prices that includes the size of the house in square feet and its price. If you input all these numbers into an LLM and ask, I have a house that's 1,000 square feet. What do you think is a good price? The LLM won't perform well. Instead, it would be more effective to use supervised learning, which can estimate the price of a function of the size. Another example of structured data showing when different visitors might visit your website, how much you offered a product, and whether or not they made a purchase. Again, using supervised learning would be a better approach than trying to copy and paste all this information into the prompt of a large language model. So, in contrast to structured data, generative AI works best with unstructured data. Structured data refers to organized tabular information like what you would store in a specific in a spreadsheet. On the other hand, unstructured data includes text, images, audio, and video. So generative AI can handle all these types of unstructured data, but its impact is most significant when it comes to text data. That's why we'll focus primarily on text data in our lessons. Finally, large language models or LLMs can exhibit bias in their output and may sometimes produce toxic or harmful speech. These models are trained on text from the internet, which unfortunately reflects societal biases. For example, if you ask an LLM to complete the sentence, the surgeon walked to the parking lot and took out, it might say his car keys. However, if you change it to the nurse walked to the parking lot and took out, it might respond with her phone. In this case, the LLM assumes that the surgeon is male and the nurse is female, even though both professions can be held by individuals of any gender. If you plan to use an LLM in situations where such biases could be harmful, it's important to be careful with your prompts to avoid reinforcing these undesirable biases. Additionally, some LLMs may occasionally generate toxic or harmful content, including instructions for undesirable or even illegal activities. Fortunately, major LLM providers are actively working to improve the safety of their models. As a result, it has become much harder to elicit harmful responses when using their web interfaces. So, here are some helpful tips to prompting or for prompting large language models or LLMs. If you're using the web interface of an LLM provider, we hope you'll find these tips useful right away. So these same tips will also come in handy if you're involved in building software applications that utilize LLMs. So in this topic, we'll cover three main tips for prompting large language models. You should be detailed and specific by providing clear and precise instructions. Guide the model's thought process. Help the model think through its answers step by step. Then the third one, just experiment and iterate. Don't be afraid to try different approaches and refine your prompts. So let's start with the first tip, be detailed and specific. Using the fresh college grad analogy we had earlier, it's important to ensure the model has enough context or background information to complete the task effectively. For example, if you simply ask the model, help me write an email to be assigned to the legal documents project, it may struggle because it doesn't have enough context to craft a compelling case for you. However, if you provide additional details such as I've applied for a position in the legal documents project where we check legal documents and I have relevant experience, the model will have the necessary context to help you write a more effective email. Moreover, describing the task in detail can improve the outcome. Instead of saying, help me write an email, you could say, Write a paragraph explaining why my background makes me a strong candidate for this project. This way, you're giving the model both the context and clear instructions, increasing the likelihood of getting the result you want. The second tip is to guide the model to think through its answer. For example, if you ask the model to brainstorm 5 names for a new cat toy, it can generate some good ideas. But if you have something specific in mind, like rhyming name for the cat toy along with a relevant emoji, then you can structure your prompt to guide the model through, uh, to guide the model through its answering process and to get more effective results. You could say something like this: brainstorm 5 names for a new cat toy. Step one, come up with 5 joyful words related to cats. Step two, for each word, create a rhyming name. Step three, add fun, relevant emoji for each toy name. So, with a prompt structured this way, you might get results where the model follows your instructions and suggest names like per whisker and so on, along with corresponding emojis. So you might get playful names like per twirl, whisker whisper, and feline bilin, feline beline, each with fun emojis added at the end. If you have a specific process in mind for how the model could arrive at the answer you want, providing clear step by step instructions can be very effective. Finally, you may have come across many articles on social media that list prompts like, say, 20 prompts everyone must know, or 15 prompts to grow your career. Yeah, those uh, guides we see in social media. However, I believe there isn't a one size fits all prompt. Instead, I find it more helpful to have a process for creating prompts that generate the results you need. When I prompt an LLM, I often experiment and iterate. For example, I might start with something simple like, help me rewrite this. If I'm not satisfied with the result, I can clarify by saying correct any grammatical or spelling errors. If that still doesn't give me what I want, I might refine it further by asking, correct any grammatical and spelling errors and rewrite it in a tone appropriate for a professional resume. So, yeah, the key to effective prompting isn't about starting with perfect prompt. It's about beginning with something, assessing the results, and adjusting the prompt to get closer to what you want. We look at prompting process like this. You start with an idea of what you want the LLM to do and express that in a prompt. The LLM will then respond based on your prompt, and that response may or may not meet your expectations. If it does, then that's great. You're finished. If it doesn't, you can use that initial response to refine your idea and adjust the prompt, iterating a few times until you get the desired result. At the beginning, we try to be reasonably clear and specific, but to save time, we often start with a shorter prompt that might not be as detailed as we'd like. The goal is to get started quickly. Once you've received a response, if it isn't what you want, consider why it fell short. Use that understanding to refine your prompt, clarify your instructions, and repeat the process until you achieve the desired outcome. So, one important tip is not to overthink your initial prompt. It's often better to try something quickly. If it doesn't yield the results you want, that's perfectly fine. You can improve it over time. Don't worry about breaking the internet with a slightly misworded prompt. Just go ahead and experiment. However, there are two important caveats to keep in mind. If you have highly confidential information, make sure you understand how the LLM provider handles that information before pasting it into the web interface. As we saw in the previous video, a lawyer faced trouble after submitting court filings based on facts generated by an LLM. Second, second caveat, before acting on the LLM's output, it's wise to double check and determine whether you can trust that information. With these two caveats in mind, we can just jump in and try something. If it doesn't work, we use the initial result to decide how to refine the prompt for a better response. This is why we say that prompting is a highly iterative process. You may need to try several approaches before getting the result you want. That's it for tips on prompting. So I encourage you to explore the web interfaces of various LLMs and try out these ideas for yourself. So in this discussion, we provided links to some popular LLM providers like ChatGPT, Google's Bard, and Microsoft Bing Chat. So just have fun experimenting with them. Uh, we'll be having uh, we'll be having some hands-on activities related to these discussions. So thank you.